Hey y'all, thanks so much for joining us today at The Heart. My name is Dominic Insenius. I'm the leader of this church community, and I'm so grateful that you have taken some time out of your day in your journey of faith to be a part of what God is doing here in the city of San Marcos. We have a saying around here, you don't have to go to church here to go to church here, and that means you are welcome to enjoy this message from your tablet, phone, or computer, wherever you're watching it on. Big things can happen when we expect God to move. So I pray today that God would speak to you through this message. The message today can encourage you and empower you to move throughout your week and what's next in your life. So enjoy this message. Now, we are continuing our message series. So here at the beginning of the year, we started a new message series called Villains and Heroes. And I gave you a little bit of a background last week, but if you weren't here, that's okay. And you can always find our previous messages on YouTube and the podcast, wherever you get your podcasts, it's on there. We talked a little bit about how this series came from this idea a few months ago, really, when things were really cooking in the middle of the quarantine and we weren't quite back yet. We were all really hating each other online. And all that's gone now. Everything's great online. I'm sure that you've noticed on your Twitter feed and Facebook and everything else. We were really getting good at hating each other. We were really getting good at calling each other names and identifying who the evil people were in our life. And maybe we've always been good at it. But this quarantine really helped it come to the surface. And I thought it's so interesting how you and I can identify villains in our life. We can easily identify people who disagree with us and make them villains. And in the same way, we can easily identify people in our life who agree with us and make them heroes. So before you tune me out, okay, before you disagree with what I'm going to say, give me 20 minutes or so and allow what we're talking about today, maybe just to consider what it would be like to change the way you think. That's what we talked about last week, is changing the way you think, changing how you approach something, not changing your mind, okay? The point of me being up here is not to tell you what to think. It's not to tell you what you should believe. In fact, what makes this community so great, one of the reasons I love this community here at The Heart is because we have several different viewpoints, so many different perspectives. People who are on the left side and the right side. People who agree with this but disagree with that. And I think that's what makes this community so powerful, is we can have these differing viewpoints. We can have these different things that we think and believe and talk about and act like, but we still can understand that we are here for each other. The danger comes in is when we make people villains in our life, and that keeps us from connection. It keeps us from loving people. And if we're not careful, assigning people the role of villain in our life gives us every reason, allows us to justify not connecting with them, not loving them, not forgiving them, not being graceful toward them. And I'm not saying that everybody in your life needs to be your friend. I'm not saying that you need to be in great relationship with every person in your life, especially people who have harmed you and hurt you in the past. That's not what I'm saying. I was thinking about this idea of a villain, trying to think about villains in my life. And before we get going, let's define a villain, shall we? I want to define a villain for you. This is literally the number one definition for villain when I looked it up. It's a character in a story or play who opposes the hero. If you're taking notes, if you're going to take notes today, write that down or take a photo of this or whatever. A photo. Picture, pic. Who even knows what to say anymore? I don't. Definition of a villain is a character in a story who opposes the hero. A character in a story. Do you see that? Hold on to that. We're going to come back to that. So I was thinking about villains in my life, and I had a boss years and years ago, ages and ages ago. And This boss, I felt, was passive-aggressive. You ever worked with a passive-aggressive person or been married to one or raised one? Okay. This boss, this boss was very passive-aggressive, and you never knew what kind of mood they were going to be in, he or she. You know what I mean? Don't try to guess who it is, okay? You never know what kind of mood they were going to be in. You never knew if they were going to be happy to see you or if they said something. You know, passive-aggressive people, they're so good at, like, they say something, you're like, what was behind that? They meant something else. They said that, but they meant something else. And then the more I would kind of be around this passive-aggressive person, I started to look for problems. I started to look for things they did that bothered me. You ever do that? You have someone in your life and you assign them the role of villain. They are the bad guy to your good guy. They're the villain. They're the character in your story that you have problems with. And what I started to do, and tell me if you're with me on this, what I started to do is look for things that they did that were wrong. Look for things that they would say that were mean to somebody else, and that I made them the villain in everybody else's story. And it was easy. It was easy for me to assign them the role of villain. It was easy for me to make them the bad guy. It's easy for us to make people the bad guys in our story. It takes intention to not. It takes intention to not do that. And so what I want to do today is I want to look at a piece of Scripture that it's in the book of John. And we're going to look at a little bit, because if you're reading the Bible, and let's say just for fun, you're reading the Bible as a story. It's just a story. If you're reading the Bible as a story, who would the hero be? This is an easy answer. I promise you know it. Okay, yeah, it's Jesus. Nailed it. The questions only get harder from there. If we're reading the Bible as a story, the hero is Jesus. Does anybody know who the villain is in the story of Jesus? Anybody? Judas. Maybe not. Who opposes Jesus all the time? Who is Jesus always arguing with? Those pesky Pharisees. Lucifer. All of those infamous arguments with Jesus and Lucifer. The Pharisees. Pharisees are always getting mad at Jesus for doing something he's not supposed to be doing. For doing something he's not supposed to be doing when he's not supposed to be doing it. And Jesus is always talking about how the Pharisees don't quite get it. And if you're reading the Bible and all you have is the context here, it can be easy to look at the Pharisees, and we'll look at here in a second, okay? It can be easy to look at the Pharisees and say, wow, these guys did they not know they were talking to the Son of God? Did they not know that they were talking to the Savior of humanity? Did they not know that they were talking to God's Son? How could they not know that? Ooh, they are such villainous Pharisees with their rules and their law. So I want to read you this story, okay? Watch this. This is going to be juicy. If you're not taking notes, get ready to take notes, okay? So, now, we're going to be in the book of John, okay? Now, if you're not familiar with the Bible, it's okay. We're going to be reading out of the New Living Translation. You might have a different translation on your phone or at home or whatever it is. So, if you have a different translation, no worries. The words might look a little bit different. What we're trying to do is get the idea, get the gist, get the juice of what the authors of the Bible are trying to say to us, okay? Now, before we jump into verse 16, I'm going to give you kind of a preamble, okay? I'm going to set you up for what we're talking about here. Now, in this particular chapter of this book, of this story, of this story here of kind of Jesus on earth, book of John is one of the four Gospels, kind of the story of Jesus on earth, the things he did, miracles, feeding people, teaching, and getting mad at religious people. That's what makes Jesus so fun, I think. You ever thought of Jesus as fun? It's fun. And he's fun because he's always getting mad at religious people, church people. Maybe we're church people. Maybe you are. Maybe I am. Okay, watch this. Okay. So before we get into verse 16, I'm just going to read this for you real quick. So in this particular part of the story, Jesus has just healed a man who was born blind. Okay? Maybe you've heard the story, maybe it's familiar. He just healed a man who was born blind. And the Pharisees, the religious people, they see this man, and they asked him, who healed you? What happened? He told them, the man they called Jesus made mud, spread it over my eyes, and told me, go to the pool of Siloam, and Siloam? I should have looked it up. And wash yourself. So I went and washed, and now I can see. Where is he now? They asked. They is the Pharisees, the religious people. They want to know where this guy is. Who is this guy that thinks he's God's gift to the world? I don't know, he replied. Then they took the man who had been blind to the Pharisees because it was on the Sabbath that Jesus made the mud and healed him. The Pharisees asked the man all about it, so he told them, he put the mud over my eyes, I washed it away, and now I can see. Now, let's jump into 16. Some of the Pharisees said, this man, Jesus, is not from God, for he is working on the Sabbath. Others said, but how could an ordinary sinner do such miraculous signs? So there was a deep division of opinion among them. I want you, if you can, to put yourself in the position. You're back then, okay? It's back in the old days. Back in the Old Testament. And it's easy to look at the Pharisees and see them as the villain. Because if you're back there, the Pharisees are religious people. And what they were trying to do was protect their way of life, the way they connected with God, their religion. They were trying to protect it from this man who was just going around doing everything he wanted, no matter what. They were trying to protect people from this crazy person who was saying that you could just connect to God whenever you wanted. You can just pray to the Father. And the Pharisees like, no, you can't. That's not what our rule book says. Watch this. I don't have this up here, but this is just so much fun. Exodus is so much fun. People always say that when they read the book of Exodus. Woo! It's a hoot. That's the tagline for the book of Exodus. Watch this. This is chapter 20, verse 8. Okay, this is part of the 10 Commandments. Ever heard of it? The 10 Commandments is in this Bible. I don't have a Jewish Bible with me as well. It's in this one. Watch what it says in verse 8. Remember to observe the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. You have 6 days each week for ordinary work, but on the seventh day, the Sabbath day, you rest and dedicate that day to the Lord. It's right there. Jesus knew the rules. It's not like Jesus came to introduce a new religion. He was talking to his people. Jesus was Jewish. I don't know if you knew that. And the rules are very clear. You're not supposed to do anything on the Sabbath. You're not supposed to do anything on the Sabbath. Pretend just for a moment that you don't think Jesus is a cool guy, that you don't think Jesus is the hero. Pretend for a moment. You're trying to wrap your head around, okay, so for years and years and years, our God, the rules that came down, okay, you've heard these stories your whole life of Moses, a hero of the Jewish faith, who connected with God, who knew God, who saw God, who received these commandments on how you and I are supposed to treat each other, treat ourselves, how you and I are supposed to connect with God. And one of those laws, one of those commandments, one of those things that came down from the mountain, these are God's words. One of those things said, don't do anything on the Sabbath. Don't do anything on the Sabbath. Don't work, don't get up, rest. Leave it as a day for the Lord. Leave it as a day that you rest. And all of a sudden, here comes this cowboy riding into town on a donkey named Jesus, and he's going to shake things up in Jerusalem. He's going to come in and do things because, again, just for a second, pretend that we all don't think Jesus is a cool guy, and maybe you don't, that's okay. He goes to heal this man who was born blind. Do you think this man was born blind the day before the Sabbath? It seems like he was born blind. He's been blind his whole life. And Jesus chooses to heal this man when? On the Sabbath. Now, we can look at it in retrospect, right? We can look at it from here in 2021 and say, oh, Jesus, he's always cooking things, you know? He's always shaking things up. He's always got something going. And the Pharisees, they were just trying to stop Jesus from healing people. Why would you want to stop Jesus from healing people? Why would you want to stop Jesus from doing all these miracles? Well, I'll tell you why. Because he wasn't doing what had been passed down for generations and generations of how you were supposed to interact with your faith. Now, I'm not trying to convince you that Jesus is now the villain. But I am trying to help you see that in this story, we have assigned the role of villain to the Pharisees. All right, if you're taking notes, write this down. Our current story tells us who our villains are. Think about your story right now, your life. Who in your life is a villain? Who in your life is harming you, is hurting you? Who in your life is against you? And here's why I say our current story tells us who our villains are. Because sometimes in our life, our villains change. Think about your life. Whether you've been alive for 7 years, 27 years, 47 years, 80 years, our story changes. And our current story tells us who our villains are. So who have the villains been in your life? And have those villains changed? Because I'll tell you this, if you're taking notes, write this down too. If the villains in your life have changed, then they can change again. And maybe they haven't. I'm not telling you need to think. Remember, this isn't a 25-minute presentation each week for me to tell you to think the way I think. That's not what this is. But if the villains in your life have changed, then they can change again. And if our current story helps us to define who the villains are in our life, does that mean the more we grow, the more we mature, the more we change, that our villains can change too? Because I guarantee you, to the people back then, the Pharisees were not the villain. Jesus might have been the villain because he was doing things you were not supposed to do. We can look back now and see that Jesus was trying to free people's minds. He was trying to free their hearts and help them to see that God was bigger than the rules that they had been following. And so we can look back now and say, man, Jesus was a revolutionary. He was trying to show us a new way, a better way, a way that we could connect to God without having to follow all of these rules. But you know what we've done over the last 2,000 years? Out of the freedom that Jesus tried to bring, we have created some of our own rules. We have looked at the new part of the book towards the back, and we've created rules out of that part. But we're not villains. We weren't creating rules to be villains. We weren't trying to be villains. The boss I had, maybe the passive-aggressive people in your life, the boss I had, whatever, he wasn't trying to be a villain, or she. They weren't trying to be a villain to me. Our current story tells us who our villains are. Okay, if you're taking notes, write this down. Understanding where someone is coming from doesn't mean you excuse their actions. I want to challenge you to understand the people in your life that you have identified as villains. I want to challenge you to understand where they're coming from. Now, I want to take a second on this because what I am not saying is that I want you to just let everyone say whatever they want to you, let everyone do whatever you want, because we should just forgive everybody and everything will be great. That's not what I'm saying. I said it at the beginning, I said it last week, and I'll say it again. I am not trying to change your mind. I'm not trying to get you to vote differently, to think differently, to do things differently, to act differently, to say things differently. What I want you to be able to do is give yourself permission to see, where am I identifying and naming villains in my life? Where is that happening for me? And can you allow yourself, challenge yourself, to take the time to understand where that person might be coming from? To understand where that person might be coming from. Take a look at the Pharisees. Can you understand where they might be coming from? Does it excuse them murdering Jesus? Probably not. Does it excuse some of the things they were trying to do? No, I don't think it excuses anything. But I personally can understand where they're coming from. I understand why they were so intent on stopping Jesus from doing and saying all of these things. I don't agree with them. I don't agree with how they handled it. I don't agree with the way they think. I don't agree with living life by rules, but I can understand where they're coming from. I can understand, because if somebody walked in here and started telling us everything you believe about Jesus is wrong, here's the new way, there's a few of us that would be like, whoa, whoa, whoa. I mean, I don't know if we would kill them, but we would definitely have some objections. We would definitely have some objections. And maybe it's not religion. Maybe it's how you raise your kids or how you were raised. You're growing up, the way you were raised, the way your parents raised you or didn't raise you, or whatever you're in therapy for. The way our parents raised us was our normal. We didn't know anything else. And it's not until we grow up, it's not until our story changes, that we see what we thought was normal isn't. Right? What we thought was, this is how every family is, right? If you grew up an only child, you have no concept of what it's like to have a brother or sister living with you in the house. So you don't know anything else. And it's not until you grow up and maybe you have a friend that's like a brother or like a sister, and you start to understand it, and your story starts to change. I was watching this interview one time with Jay-Z. How old is this guy? Jay-Z. Guy's in his 50s. And he grew up with a single mom. And the way this guy talks about his father who was addicted to drugs, the way that he talks about his father is so forgiving. It was inspiring how forgiving he is. Because Jay-Z, or whoever, you could look at his father and see him as the villain. You could look at his father and see him as the villain who abandoned his family, who abandoned his child. But Jay-Z, as he gets older, he looks back and he sees a young kid in his late teens talking about his father, who didn't know what he was doing, who was scared, and who was addicted to drugs. And when he talked about his father in this way, all of the venom, all of these actions that you and I could easily assign as villainous, easily assign as what a monster this person was, all of a sudden, somebody like Jay-Z, and maybe yourself, maybe me, can say, I think I can understand where he was coming from. But you got to hear me. Does it excuse the actions? No. I'm not saying you need to allow everything. I'm not saying that everything is excusable in your life. I'm not saying that you should let everyone say whatever they want and you shouldn't speak up when you're passionate about something. No, you should definitely do all of those things. But can you challenge yourself to understand where someone is coming from? I'm telling you, understanding does not equal excusing. Understanding someone does not equal excusing what they have done. Understanding where someone is coming from does not excuse what they say. Understanding where someone is coming from does not excuse what they have done in your life. That harm, that hurt that you're carrying, it's real. I'm not saying get rid of it. I'm not saying pretend it's not there. I'm saying if we can allow ourselves to understand where people are coming from, then we can remove the label of villain. Maybe there are no villains. We're almost done here. What if there are no villains? There's just people that we can forgive. There's people that we can forget about. There's people that we can avoid. There's people that we need to get out of our life. But what if there are no villains? Because if a villain is a character in a story, and our story changes as we grow and move and meet different people, and our villains can change, then maybe they're not villains at all, but we just assign them the role of villain to justify our anger, to justify our frustration, to justify our hurt. But you don't need those things justifying. You can be angry. You can be hurt. You know why it's easy to assign people as villains? Is because it allows us to be victimized. It allows us to be the victim. And I'm not saying you're not a victim, because I was victim to hurt. I was victim to the harm that people in my life have tried to cause me, and the people in your life that have harmed you, that have hurt you. You are victim to that. But what's incredible about our life, what's incredible about our God, is that we have been empowered to choose to move forward anyway. We have the power to forgive. We have the power to understand people in our life. And we can choose not to. Go ahead. You can do whatever you want. You don't have to take the time to understand. You don't. You are empowered to not do any of these things. But when we take the time to understand someone, this boss I had years ago, he or she is probably still passive aggressive. But back then, I was in my 20s. And now, in my very, very early 40s, so early, barely 40s, I understand a few things differently. I don't have the same outlook as I did when I was in my early 20s. And I look at this person now, and I feel a little bit sorry for them. I feel a little bit sorry for them to be able to be stuck in this world where you can't honestly communicate what you're thinking because you're afraid of what people might think. Does that excuse all the things that they did to me? No. No, I'm not telling you that you need to excuse the people in your life. But I am challenging you to understand them. Challenging you to understand the people that you have assigned the role of villain. And you don't need to make them a hero now. You don't need to say that they did everything right. But what if you looked back at the people that you assigned as a villain and said, I wonder where they were coming from? What would change about your situation? Maybe nothing. Maybe everything. If you can understand where someone is coming from, then you can read a post and not hate the person posting it. If you can understand where someone is coming from, then you can read a news article and your blood won't start to boil. Because if we're reading a post, an article, listening to someone at work, hearing something our boss says, and there's no context, if we don't know that this person who's being passive aggressive to me, I didn't know that they were going through a very hard time in their life. I didn't know that their marriage was on the brink of divorce. I didn't know that their kids weren't talking to them because they didn't have a good relationship. I didn't know those things. All I saw was this villain in my life. All I saw were these terrible things this person did to me, said to me. But when I took the time to understand where they're coming from, I still didn't like all the things they did. I still didn't like all the things they said. And it still made me upset when they would tell me things. But all of the venom, all of the villainous ways that I had assigned to them was gone because I understood where they were coming from. You allow people to be human when you understand where they're coming from. Because a villain is not human. A villain is a character in a story. A villain is a character in your story, but there are no villains in your story. All there are is other human beings who are messed up, who are hurt, who have ill intentions towards you, ill intentions towards their kids, ill intentions towards other people. They're not villains, they're just humans. And we have been challenged. We have been challenged to forgive, to love. Okay, forgiving and loving, that's not a Republican thing, that's not a Democrat thing, that's not a libertarian thing. Forgiving and loving is a Jesus thing. Forgiving and loving is a way that Jesus was teaching us how to treat each other. I don't care how you vote. I don't care what you post, but I do care if we're assigning people as villains and we're not taking time to love each other, to understand where each other are coming from. Hot take. Can you challenge yourself to understand where the people in your life are coming from? Only you know that. Only you know that. Maybe you won't. Maybe you walk out of here today and nothing changes for you. That's okay. What if it did? What if it did change for you? What if you allowed yourself to see the villains in your life as human beings and took the time to understand where they might be coming from? If you could bow your head and close your eyes, I want to pray for you today. I want to challenge you today, and whether you accept the challenge or not, we're all going to pray together. But I want to challenge you today, this week, to identify the villains in your life, and it should be easy. It should be easy to identify who the villains are. And at least one of those people, if there's more than one, can you challenge yourself to take the time to understand where they might be coming from? You got to be careful. Understanding doesn't mean excusing. Understanding where they're coming from does not mean you're excusing their actions. It just means you are taking the time to understand where they're coming from. And if you are willing to take that challenge this week, then on the count of 3, I want you to raise your hand. With your heads down, your eyes closed. 1, 2, 3. Put your hands up if you're ready to take that challenge. Okay, put your hands down. I'm going to pray for you. God, we are so grateful to be a part of a community, to be a part of a church, to be a part of a group of people who are willing to love when it's difficult, who are willing to see someone's heart. God, I pray as we step forward into this week that we would allow ourselves to be challenged. We would allow ourselves to understand where people are coming from, to understand where we're coming from. God, help us to forgive where we need to forgive. Help us to forget when we need to forget. Help us to have the boldness and the courage to get people out of our life that are not healthy for us. But through all of it, that we would keep a posture of love, that we would keep our heart warm towards the people that you have also created. We love you. We pray that in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. Y'all, thanks so much for joining us today at The Heart. To find out what is next for you in your journey of faith, I want to invite you to go to theheart.church/next, see what's in store for you, get in touch with us. We would love to be able to connect with you and see how we can partner with you in your journey. I hope you have a great rest of your week, and we'll see you soon.